Hello everyone, this is lecture 13 on image captioning. Image captioning is the last lecture in the supervised learning block, and it kind of provides you with the foundation of stuff that will come later in the unsupervised learning block, language models and sequence models. But I think although it's a special task within computer vision, it's pretty complex, pretty hard problem, and pretty interesting. So let's have a look at how this goes. Um, let's first recap what kind of tasks we have been looking at, what kind of answers our models should provide. And we started with this pretty simple task that we called classification. So in image, we were interested in the things and objects that could be seen in there. So the answer or the result that the model should provide was a distribution of class probabilities. For example, for a bat, dog, cat, and all these other animals. So if the model was trained properly, this hopefully then would produce a distribution like that. And then we have looked at object detection. So, for example, a model could result in a set of parameters that define the location and spatial dimensions of the so-called bounding box. So now we don't just know what it is, we also know where it is. And we talked about semantic segmentation, so we could classify each of these pixels to belong to target classes. And we have also talked about pose estimation, so the location of certain key points that kind of make up like a skeleton of the object, so we kind of know in what configuration the limbs of animals or humans were. Now, these different output representations relate to different levels of image understanding, right? So if you have a human observer that only gets either the distribution of those class probabilities, or only sees the location and spatial dimensions of the bounding boxes, or even just sees those skeletons here, would we be able to imagine a scene like here depicted in this image? I mean, obviously, the more information we get, the easier this process is, right? So the easier my imagination can generate such a scene. It's pretty hard, having just those class probabilities. But in all these three cases, the output is kind of a predefined, set of objects. So whether it's the class probabilities for the predefined classes, and even in the bounding box scenario, those bounding boxes correspond to those classes that are predefined. And here also the pose estimation relates to, humans or animals or objects that are predefined. So what if something new is happening, or something's happening that the model hasn't been trained on? So that's why we need something that is more versatile, that is more flexible in terms of describing what is in the image. And the perfect means is language, right? So we humans understand language and have been trained to understand language. And so why don't we make our machines spit out a description of what's in the image, so the humans can then translate that back into something visual. Okay, so for example, here the man at bat readies to swing at the pitch while the umpire looks on. So that's crazily specific and pretty short though. And I think it's given those comparisons here, is a much better description and a much more flexible description. Even if stuff would if a UFO would fly through the image, we could actually capture that in in the sentence. And if you think about it, it's a pretty tough task, right? So language now doesn't just have to tell us what kind of objects are in the image, like the man and the umpire. It kind of has to semantically and syntactically um, match, you know, what's, how these objects are interacting and in what kind of actions they are involved, and put these to the correct location. So I think this is crazily complex, and that's why I think it's a perfect conclusion to our supervised learning portion of this lecture. So in the core of image captioning, we have a connection between image representation and language modeling. And that task, image captioning, is related to the reverse process, so text to image generation. So given a text, generate or given a description of an image, generate an image that matches that description. And these images here are taken from a paper that was published last year, I think, by OpenAI, and the system called DALL-E combines exactly those two components: image representation models and like a big language model. Okay, so let's have a look at how image captioning works. It's obvious that image captioning has a lot of applications. So starting from automatic descriptions, machine descriptions for the vast number of images that you can find in the web. So if you are a content provider and you don't want to have humans label each of these images, you can have your image captioning model do that. Or think of visually impaired people that want to browse the web anyway and want to get the full width of rich image contents that you have there. So you can have like a system that reads those descriptions that we obtain on images. Or like think of video sequences. You can have like a captioning system that summarizes what's happening in a video. And so I think we have to move on and now learn how these things work. Before we can actually dive into architectures and how we train these things, we have to recap a little bit how we model sequences. So please watch this video. I think it should appear here on recurrent networks. There are like two in a sequence recorded for the last winter term where we had this lecture on machine learning. But to summarize, if we have a sequence like sentences, right? Those are sequences of words or characters even. What we want to do is we want to have a model. I want to have a model that spits out like a probability distribution over the next word, right? So that's more tractable than having a model that spits out the probability distribution over all sequences. So we break it down and approach this in a sequential manner. So our network here is supposed to result or give a distribution, probability distribution over all tokens, over all words, let's say, in our vocabulary. And then, we can condition for the next step, we can condition the same network on the previously generated word, and then we can generate the next word in the sentence, right? And the good thing is now that the RNN has an internal state that represents all the words that came before the current input. Yeah, so that approach is pretty common, so that in the end we have a model of the probability of one word given the history of words that came before. Yeah. By the way, boss is the beginning of a sentence or the beginning of sequence. Token, so that is a word that is, you know, unique in the vocabulary, and there's also like a stop token that's also unique, and so your model can be trained to start something and stop the sequence. Yeah. Now, something that you also should be seeing in the video that I linked is that one common architecture for sequence-to-sequence tasks is the encoder-decoder architecture. So, you know, we can assume that this, for example, could be a German sentence, and we want to generate an English sentence. So we want to translate one language into the other. That's usually being done or modeled as a transduction problem or transduction task. So we have an encoder generate a like a representation of the input. So that representation has like a fixed dimensionality and is independent of the length of the input sequence. And from that, we can then generate also variable length output sequence. And the idea today will be that this intermediary representation of the input can be replaced by a representation that we obtain, for example, using a convolutional network. Yeah. So an input image is processed, for example, here by this three layers of convolutions into a representation that can then serve as an input to like a recurrent network, and that recurrent network then is conditioned, on this input and then generates that output. And by the way, the PowerPoint software that I used to create this lecture did exactly that. It generated an output, an image description that reads an image that mammal, animal, dog contains. Okay. Today I'm going to show you a paper that was published in 2015, one of those first image captioning papers. It's heavily cited. It's not the most cited paper in image captioning, but I think it's a really like a good introductory kind of algorithm and model here for you, and was published by Google. And there are a couple of things that build up on that. For example, show, attend, and tell. A model that uses attention. So remember back to the last lecture we had, we covered transformers. And today, transformer architectures are pretty much everywhere, also in the image captioning field. But anyway, I'm going to use this one to also introduce you to RNNs and LSTMs, because they will come up in one of those later lectures, and we need that as a foundation. So let's dive right into this one here. So again, the algorithm can be described with a single slide. As I told you, we want to have an image encoder, a model that takes in an image and comes up with a representation Z that kind of describes everything that is in the image. And then we'll project this vector Z down to, let's say, we call input at t minus 1, which is kind of the first step in generating an output. Now, this matrix W1 or Wi for image projects Z into a vector space that has the same dimensionality as your LSTMs. And if you don't know what LSTMs are and how they're constructed, please watch this video, that video, oh man, and come back here. So the LSTM requires an input X, maintains a hidden representation, or actually two vectors of hidden representations, And so by feeding the image into the LSTM, we kind of condition it to generate something that is depending on the image. And so we'll then feed tokens, so text tokens, words, for example, into this LSTM as as subsequent inputs. And again, we have embedding matrices, WE, and they project these one-hot encoded tokens, for example, into a vector space that matches the LSTM size. Yeah, and then we do exactly what we've seen on one of those previous slides. We generate a distribution over our vocabulary, over all the words that we know, and then in training, we compare this to the actual sentence that this image is associated with in our training set. Yeah, and do that for all the words in that sequence. Now, in training, we'll use the negative log likelihood as a loss function, on these outputs, and a rollout that is as long as the sentence that we have. And those parameters are the parameters that we want to optimize for are these word embeddings, this image embedding, and obviously the parameters within the recurrent network. So that's a pretty simple idea, right? Take ConfNet, feed in your image, take an image representation that fits into your LSTM, and then generate words that are conditioned on that image input. Now, what kind of data sets are available to actually train these models? And I think there are two really relevant that I wanted to mention. So one is something that you already know. It's the so-called COGO data set that also comes with an image captioning task in 2015, I think. And these were VGA-sized images. You have some 80,000 images for training, and then 40,000 for validation and 40,000 for testing and development. And each of these images comes with a human label, or human written sentence, and that's it. Then you have a smaller data set that's called Flickr 8K. It comes with 8,000 images of variable size, so you have to resize that to feed into your ConfNet. And again, it comes with 5 sentences that describe your input. Then we have to talk about evaluation metrics. So let's say you have trained your network. How do you make sure it actually does something useful? Well, first of all, you can use humans, because these are perfect in understanding language, right? So that's the gold standard, let's say, to measure the performance of an image captioning model. So you take your image and the description that your model has generated, and take a couple of users and show them input and output, and then they should rate, for example, how useful these are, how correct they are, or how broadly or how specific they explain things. So there's a wide variety of approaches that you can take. Let's say we just call it useful, and we have a spectrum of 100% useful to 0% useful, and then we'll just count how many of these ratings we find for each of those, let's say, usefulness brackets, and then we could average them, or we could take the median or so to have a measure for each sample. And then in the end, we could have like a distribution of these usefulness values over our validation set. Now, this is good, but it's very slow, so it takes a while to set up everything so users can actually look at it. and then run the experiments. And it's pretty expensive because people usually, don't do that for free. You have to pay them on, those different platforms that you can think of, Amazon Turk, for example. So the next best thing you can implement is the so-called blue score. It was introduced in, I think, 2002 for testing the performance of machine translation models. It scores the similarity of a given machine translation to a set of reference sentences. So it's pretty similar to what we have in image captioning tasks, right? So we have a sentence that comes out of our model and 5 reference sentences that we can compare it to. And the score typically is between 0 and 1. Sometimes people multiply it by 100, so we have something like 100% or 50% or something. And it has been shown to correlate well with human scores, although people have said and shown that is not perfect. Yeah, because language is so complex, you can describe different things in an image, and in a variety of ways, and then you can focus on certain aspects of what's in the image, and that's still correct. And then obviously it's also relevant what those reference sentences are. And so, but anyway, it correlates well with human scores. So especially in model development, when we have, like, I don't know, 100 or so different candidate models, in hyperparameter tuning, we don't want to run human trials with them, user tests. We want to have something that is almost as accurate and still gives us a notion of what model is good and what model is bad. It's easy to implement, but you can also find many open implementations for free. And so this is how it works. We start by looking at the different reference sentences that we have. So let's say we have two. One is the dog is sleeping under the table. The second one says there is a dog sleeping under the table. And our output sentence is the dog is sitting on the table. So quite some error in terms of correctness from a human point of view. But let's see what blue does with that output and how it does that. So the blue score looks at different n-grams. An n-gram is, for example, like if n is equal to 1, a unigram, which is just a word in the sentence, right? So the, or dog, or is, and all these things. A 2 or a bigram is all pairs of words that are neighbors, right? So the dog is a bigram, dog is a bigram, and all these combinations of words that you see here. And blue now combines these n-grams as follows. So first, let's focus on unigrams. These are the ones that are present in the output. And now we'll first count for each of these unigrams how many times they are present in one of those reference sentences. We take the maximum. So for the word the, we are able to count it like twice here in the beginning and there in the back. And in the second reference sentence, there's only the word the is only once here. Yeah. So we take the maximum, which is 2, and then we do that for all the unigrams that we have in the output and obtain a list of counts as you see here. And then we count how many times there is this unigram in the output. So there's every unigram is present once, except the that's present twice. And so we then sum up all these counts and divide the first one by the second one and obtain 0.71 for the unigrams. Now we'll continue with higher n's for the n-grams. For example, with 2 grams or bigrams. So I've written down again 7 different bigrams can be found or can be cut out of this output. So the dog and dog is and is sitting and all these the bigrams in this table, and we do, as we did before, first count the existence of those bigrams in the reference sentences. And then we sum these up, and then we divide how many times these bigrams actually appear in the output. And this one is simple here. Every bigram appears just once, but the longer those sentences are, that could even, or the the more crazy your model is, these numbers could also be higher. So then summing up these two columns, we'll divide these two numbers and then obtain a bigram score for or the blue bigram score of 0.43. So you can then continue with longer n-grams and compute those bn's. So you take the sum of over all n-grams, so that can be found in your prediction y hat, of this reference count, right? So you look in those reference sentences, take the maximum of the count of these given n-grams and divide by how many times those n-grams can be found in your prediction. Now, the blue score is basically an average over all of these n-gram scores. There are a couple of details missing that I think shouldn't belong on this slide, but you can definitely go to this paper and read about the details. There's like a penalty, to kind of encourage models to have longer captions, because short captions are basically have a benefit in this metric, have better scores. So, but yeah, I think this paper is a nice read anyway, so I don't have to give you all the details. There are also a couple other metrics you will find, Meteor and Cider, but I think blue is the most widely used and still like the reference everyone kind of states in their papers. And that's exactly when we get to the results. Now, I'm going to limit this to the results computed using the blue metric. And so the neural image captioning model that I just explained earlier performs best even compared to human annotations or human descriptions, which kind of tells you something about how much you can trust blue scores. But back in that time, it was a crazily good result here. I'm gonna jump over that. Please read the paper; it's really readable. So let's have a look at the results. I think they look really good, given how simple the approach was, right? So pre-trained image model, take the representation, feed it into an RNN, generate text, boom. Crazy. So, but you still see a variety of like caption qualities, let's say. Ones that are really perfect, a person riding a motorcycle on the road, that's pretty much what we can see here, or a group of young people playing a game of frisbee. It's pretty hard, right? Spotting, even for a human, spotting that frisbee here. And then, some captions are slightly off. So 2 dogs, instead of 3 play in the grass, or, some captions kind of capture the context, or like the rough domain that is in. Skateboarder does a trick on the ramp, and some is really off. But I think, back in that time, these results were remarkable and kind of also like pushed the field towards new developments. It also kind of tells you why this is hard, yeah. So, and also explains why those blue scores are so low with 25%. That means, like, on average, your description either captures only 25% of the words and n-grams, or you have only 1/4 of those captions accurately describing what's on the image, and the rest is kind of like you see here, a mixture of okay or really bad. Okay, good. So that was image captioning. I hope you enjoyed that. Leave a comment. I haven't yet prepared any questions for you, but maybe I will. Maybe I will. See you on Wednesday. Ciao.